North Korea's recent diplomatic activities have brought significant attention to the region. From its rare opening to Japan, which ended in abrupt rejection of all future talks, to its latest series of overseas trips, questions are arising regarding Pyongyang's intentions. This as the North continues to abandon unification efforts with the South. On today's edition of Within the Frame, we delve into the intricate geopolitics surrounding North Korea and its neighboring countries. I'm Han-dan in Seoul, and joining me tonight is Ko Myung-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. So great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
Also accompanying us this evening is Brian Myers, Professor of International Studies at Dongsa University. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Go, Dr. Go, let's start with you. With the recent drama between North Korea and Japan, Yo-jong, not long after opening doors to North Korea, it shut the door again, saying Japan does not have the courage to take the first step to mend ties with the North. What do you make of this?
So I don't think the door to dialogue is entirely closed. I think Kim Yo-jong is leaving some space for Japan to reach out to North Korea again. So what's really going on here is North Korea really playing the typical negotiation brinkmanship. We have seen this before. In fact, we have seen this back in Singapore in 2019 when U.S. President back then, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un met for the first time. So, but until the eve of the summit, the North Koreans were pushing back on the idea of having a summit because the reason why they do that is because they want to dictate the terms of a discussion agenda. And here, what's in contention is the fact that the Japanese and the Prime Minister Kishida wants to make some progress regarding the abductee issue, which has been stalled in the last 2 decades. And in fact, this is exactly what he needs to. It's an outcome that he has promised the Japanese people implicitly. Otherwise, there's no reason why the Japanese Prime Minister should sit down with Kim Jong-un at this juncture. So in that sense, I think there's a high stake on the Japanese side. I think the North Koreans sense that, and the North Koreans sense that they can push Japan a little bit and somehow to really bump the abductee issue off the agenda and solely concentrate on perhaps normalizing relations between the two countries, which is entirely beneficial to North Korea and not so much to Japan. And clearly Japan is struggling with this idea because there's a political incentive on the part of Prime Minister Kishida, who has a really low approval rating right now at home. So he needs to score victory, and this seems to looks like a very close for him to achieve some sort of a diplomatic outcome after all these years. So it's very tantalizing, very enticing and tempting, but I think the North Koreans are going to play hard to get.
So North Korea says it will reject all future talks with Japan, but in fact, it hasn't completely shut its doors. It's actually playing hard to get, as we witnessed back in 2018, right before Kim Jong-un was due to sit down and hold talks with former U.S. President Trump. And all this because North Korea knows that Japanese Prime Minister Kishida has a clear need to materialize the summit with North Korea for various political reasons. And staying with you, one of the key agendas for Japan is the issue of Japanese abductees in North Korea. Give us a bit of historical background of the issue and why is Pyongyang so adamantly refusing to discuss the matter?
Well, I think, so going back to the background of this abduction issue, the North Korean agents did indeed abduct Japanese citizens in the 70s and 80s, not just in Japan proper, but also abroad. And the reason why North Korean agents targeted Japanese citizens in particular was because they believed that they could somehow assume the identities of the abducted Japanese citizens and send agents in the fake Japanese aliases to Korea and elsewhere, because in the 80s, Japan, if you happen to have Japanese passport, it really opened a lot of doors around the world. It facilitated spy operation for the North Koreans. So that's one of the arguments that North Koreans put forward, justifying the abduction of Japanese citizens. But then blew into their faces when the Japanese found out that there's a really weird, strange pattern of disappearances around the country. And the Japanese claim that unofficially up to 150 Japanese nationals were abducted by the North Korean agents. But officially, Japanese government recognized 17 instances of disappearances. So, but then this is where the contention begins between Japan and North Korea. North Korea only officially acknowledged abducting 13 Japanese nationals, of which 5 of them were returned to Japan back in early 2000s, along with the dependents, the family members. Some of them were born in North Korea. So 8, even under the official counting by the North Korean regime, are still missing. And when the Japanese government asked the North Korean regime about the whereabouts of the rest, the 8 individuals are still not being allowed to return to the Japanese homeland, the North Koreans put forward the insufficient evidence of justification for their disappearance. I mean, the fact that they are actually dead. That's what the North Korean regime claimed. But then there was not enough evidence that supported the contention that the Japanese abductees were indeed dead. So that's been 2 decades since then. There's been an issue about North Korea's nuclear development, the impasse about the fact that North Korea was under sanctions. So the dialogue between Japan and North Korea regarding this issue has stopped in the last 2 decades. But then at the same time, there's still a lot of pressure on the part of the Japanese public to make progress on this issue. So this is the reason why Prime Minister Kishida is still insisting on talking to the North Koreans about this issue. But the North Koreans claim that this is a chapter that's closed 20 years ago, and then now they want to move on for obvious reasons. So there's nothing to be proud about the fact that North Korea went out and abducted innocent citizens, foreign citizens. So this is the reason why there's a big gap between Japan and North Korea regarding this issue.
And which is why the issue still remains as the biggest obstacle between North Korea and Japan. Now to you, Professor Myers. A high-ranking North Korean official, Kim Sung-nam, led a delegation to China and held a series of meetings with top Chinese officials, including Foreign Minister Wang Yi. What's the purpose of their visit?
Well, the leaders of the 2 countries, Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping, exchanged New Year's messages this year where they pledged to develop their relationship, which marks its 75th anniversary this year, if you count it from the establishment of diplomatic relations. And delegational visits like these are one way of strengthening ties, or at least of signaling a strengthening of ties. But China was the first leg of a trip that is taking the North Koreans to 2 other quite friendly countries, namely Vietnam and Laos. So many people see this tour as an effort to return to normal diplomatic activities after the pandemic, during which time, as you know, North Korea sealed itself off for an especially long time and to an especially high degree. I don't see it as a particularly high-ranking delegation. I know some people are saying that Kim Sung-nam is like number 4 in the hierarchy, but I think there's a big difference between the formal exoteric hierarchy and the real power relationship.
So it's a return to North Korea's normal diplomatic activities, but a huge wave of attention is being drawn also to whether the trip to China would have set the tone for a North Korea-China summit. While Russian President Putin is widely expected to visit Pyongyang as early as May, do you foresee the 3 old friends making notable moves to further bolster ties?
I do foresee some moves. When you have the US, Japan, and South Korea coming closer in trilateral military cooperation, as they've been doing since President Yoon took over, it's only natural, I think, that countries outside America's sphere of influence feel a greater need to cooperate more closely themselves. On the other hand, I'm not sure just how friendly these old friends are. North Korea is perhaps the most nationalist and paranoid country on earth, for one thing. And Moscow and Beijing were on quite adversarial, or at least competitive terms, even during the Cold War. And those 2 governments, China and Russia, have quite a different relationship with the US right now. Of course, China's relations with Washington being less openly hostile. I think there's still a possibility of Xi Jinping and Biden coming together, whereas I think Putin has given up on that sort of thing. Now, some analysts believe that one reason the North Koreans flew to Beijing was to try to reassure the Chinese that Pyongyang and Moscow aren't going to get too cozy with each other, even if Putin does come to Pyongyang after his inauguration this year, as most people predict. So all things considered, I don't think China, North Korea, and Russia are going to work as closely together as the U.S. now works with South Korea and Japan.
It looks like experts are divided on this, on North Korea, China, Russia ties. Some say the three countries, all saddled with international sanctions, will continue to enhance economic, diplomatic, as well as security ties, while others say that China is rather distancing itself from getting too close to North Korea, Russia ties, because China, unlike the two countries, has a lot on its plate, and it's also trying to avoid direct confrontation with the U.S. So we'll have to keep a close eye on the trilateral developments. Now, Dr. Kool, the North Korean delegation, after wrapping up their trip to China, arrived in Vietnam and are also set to visit Laos. Why are they visiting the two former communist states now, and what's expected from the visit?
So I think it's an extension of the recent visit by the North Korean delegation to Beijing. So the meeting took place not as a state-to-state meeting or visit. It was took the form of the party-to-party meetings. So the communist parties of, around the world, they have a special party-to-party relations in parallel to the official government-to-government meetings. So they're emphasizing the ideological similarities and connections over the official diplomatic connections. And it's obvious that North Koreans are doing this at this time because, first of all, it's an opportunity to do so. They're in China. It's not that far to go to Vietnam, to Laos from China. So they're taking advantage of the logistics. But also, I think it's interesting that this is taking place in the aftermath of the diplomatic normalization between Cuba and South Korea. I think that has reminded North Korea that they shouldn't neglect their old friends in the third world. I think Kim Jong-un was putting too much attention in improving relations with Russia. I mean, there are a lot of benefits that derives from improving relations with major powers such as China and Russia at this juncture, especially the ones that have nuclear weapons, because that makes North Korea look like it's also a nuclear state. So I think that's the reason why Kim Jong-un for a long time neglected North Korea's relationship with his old friends in the international solidarity with the world, socialist regimes around the world. But they have seen that that South Korea had taken advantage of this gap that the North Korea had left. So I think that the North Koreans are in a defensive mode. Late last year, there are news reports of North Korea rationalizing their diplomatic presence, especially in the third world. And I think I think they probably realized that they had not so positive benefit, but actually also incurred a lot of negative side effects. So I think this is a way for North Korea to make up for the lost ground.
So it certainly is certainly linked to South Korea's formal establishment of diplomatic ties with Cuba, which is pushing North Korea to become closer to those former communist states. Now, the state-run KCNA reported that the Democratic Front for the Reunification of Korea's Central Committee, that's a lengthy name, was formally dissolved as it is no longer necessary at a time of hostility with South Korea, which the North has redefined as its primary foe. Tell us a bit about the committee and what does the dissolution imply?
So it is the first time I heard about this committee. I think North Koreans are scraping the bottom of the barrel and trying to dismantle any organization and infrastructure that was supporting the inter-Korean dialogue.
It's the first time that you've heard about this
committee.
So
it was, but it has
that
a
tells
long...
a lot, doesn't
exactly,
it?
Exactly.
I mean, you're a top North Korean expert.
So it goes way back. It was founded in 1949. It's one of the first mechanisms of inter-Korean dialogue. So it was founded even before the Korean War took place. But then it's really it's a continuation of the pattern that Kim Jong-un set the tone earlier this year. Declared that the inter-Korean relations was over, given the fact that South Korea is scheming to induce regime change in Pyongyang, as well as continuing with the confrontational attitude. So that was the ground for dismantling all types of inter-Korean mechanisms that North Korea had in place. But I think this is not really a revolutionary step taken by North Korea. I think Kim Jong-un has always been skeptical about putting priority on inter-Korean relations over North Korea's relationship with much more powerful friends such as China and Russia. So I think in North Korea Kim Jong-un at least here, is just taking advantage of the opportunity when the inter-Korean relations really not in a good state. So, and he wants to shift the blame to the South Koreans for initiating this I would say undermining of the inter-Korean relations.
Now, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is set to hold talks with U.S. President Biden next month. And according to various reports, the two countries are planning their biggest security upgrade in more than 60 years. Professor Myers, why does this come now? And what major changes are expected?
Well, the general consensus is that this talk is coming now because both countries share the perception that the Chinese threat is growing, and that includes also the threat of Chinese action against Taiwan. Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, has called China the biggest strategic challenge that America and its allies face. So it's a bigger priority than Russia and what's going on in Ukraine. And Tokyo has, of course, said that it is seriously concerned about tensions in the Taiwan Strait, which is not all that far from Japan. But, we haven't heard very many specifics about this security upgrade. We do know that Japan has already pledged to double its defense spending. And we do know that the Americans are likely to assign a 4-star general to Japan, as opposed to the lieutenant general, a 3-star, who now heads American forces in Japan. And that change would likely come in the context of a larger restructuring of the military partnership there. But as I say, we're probably not going to get reliable, concrete details until the relevant announcement comes next month.
So the reliable details are yet to be unveiled, but what we can expect is some sort of a restructuring of the U.S. command in Japan, perhaps an expansion in the role of U.S. forces Japan to enhance their interoperability in case of contingency, and all this, of course, having China in mind. Now, staying with you, Professor Myers, how would the U.S.-Japan military alliance upgrade impact security affairs surrounding the Korean Peninsula? What does it mean for South Korea? I know that we are still yet to find out the details, but what does it mean for South Korea?
Well, let's face it, it's not great news from a South Korean perspective, really, because any upgrade of the military alliance between Japan and the United States is going to be aimed primarily at China. So that's going to heighten tensions between Beijing and Washington. So then you're going to have the Americans not only trying to draw South Korea deeper into this de facto trilateral military alliance, but also trying to limit South Korean trade with China. And on the other hand, you're going to have the Chinese, of course, threatening economic retaliation against South Korea, and no doubt further undermining sanctions on North Korea as a kind of retaliation. And this is a game that the South Koreans would prefer to stay out of. There was a conservative uproar here a few days ago when the leader of the main opposition party said that South Korea should just stay on the best possible terms with China and Taiwan. But I think a majority of South Koreans feel the same way, especially now that we see Germany paying an enormous economic price for having sided openly with the United States against Russia in regard to the Ukraine war. I think that's going to be on a lot of South Koreans' minds these days, especially after that disastrous war ends and the middle powers around the world, middle powers like South Korea, ponder the lessons to be drawn from it.
Well, it looks like South Korea certainly does stand at a critical juncture amid rising geopolitical tensions. We'll have to leave it there tonight. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.